We continue now at the top of Daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 67a. This daf is sponsored by Sean Kashani. If you would like to sponsor an Amud or a daf, please see the description box below. Thank you for your sponsorship. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said that Mili lo mimsran l'shliach. In other words, if an instruction is given to a shliach, that shliach is not able to give over that instruction to another shliach. And again, that was the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, and the Gemara had suggested that Rabbi Yossi admits by a situation of Omer Imru, meaning if the shliach is told explicitly to give that instruction over to another shliach. For example, let's say a shliach is told by a husband to tell a scribe to write a get, so then by Omer Imru, that would be effective. And the Gemara says, is that really true that it would be effective by Omer Imru? But there's a Mishnah that discusses the Ksav Sofer Ve'ed, and one of the interpretations of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yirmiyah's interpretation of the Mishnah, that we're talking about Chesam Sofer, we're talking about when a scribe signs a get, and there's another aid, so the Mishnah says it's going to be kosher. And Rav Chisda says that Mishnah has to follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Why does that Mishnah have to follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi? The reason that Mishnah has to follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi is because generally we would be suspicious if a get is signed by a scribe, if it's signed by a sofer, because maybe what happened is the husband told the shliach, and he told the shliach to actually get two separate witnesses to sign the get. He didn't want the scribe to sign the get. But the shliach was embarrassed that he would tell the sofer to write the get and not sign. It's as if he's not trusted to be a witness. And so therefore maybe we're concerned that the shliach would have told the scribe, you sign instead, and that's not really kosher, because that was not really the intention of the husband. But if you say that the Mishnah is following Rabbi Yossi, that mili lo mimsran l'shliach, that wouldn't be a concern, because the shliach is never able to tell someone else to sign a get, to write a get. You can't give over an instruction. A shliach can't give an instruction, so it has to be a direct instruction from the husband, and therefore there would be no such concern. And so the Gemara says, you see from that, if the Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi, because you can't have an intermediary, so Omer Imru would also be a problem, because we'd also have a concern then, because maybe there was a shliach that was told, Imru l'sofer v'yichtov, that you should tell a scribe to write the get, v'leploni uploni v'yechs, and tell so-and-so to sign. And again, you'll have the same concern. Umishum kisuf et sofer, because of the fact that the sofer might be embarrassed, chayshu mechasmi chad mehanach sahadi, maybe the shliach decided to just sign one of the witnesses, the sofer bahadayu, and the scribe together with that one witness, ubalo amarachi, and the husband didn't say that. And so therefore you see from the fact that Rav Chisda said that if this Mishnah is talking about the signature of the sofer, it must be that the Mishnah follows Rabbi Yossi, that there can't be an intermediary. There can't be an intermediary even by Omer Imru. You see that Rabbi Yossi does not admit that Omer Imru is effective. And the Gemara answers, no, not necessarily. Because since the master said that it's kosher, in other words, it could be Omer Imru is kosher, but it's not something that should be done, so therefore lo shchiach, so therefore it's not common. In other words, it could be Rabbi Yossi would admit that Omer Imru is effective, but it's not something that's common because it's not something you should do, and so therefore there wouldn't be such a concern. Maybe Rabbi Yossi really does admit by Omer Imru. And Rashi explains, Kevan do amar mar lekamon b'shmait, and since the master said later on in the sugya, Gabi imru l'sofer v'yichtov v'leploni uploni v'yechsum u'kosher aget avalosasa, by this case of Omer Imru, when a person says, tell the scribe that he should write it and tell so-and-so that they should sign it, that it's kosher, but it shouldn't be done, so lo shchicha, so that's not common, hilkach lo gazrina, and therefore there is no gezerah in that case. In other words, it could very well be that the Mishnah is talking about the signature sofer, and again the Mishnah does follow Rabbi Yossi that there's no intermediary because and in terms of the concern of Omer Imru, maybe Rabbi Yossi does admit by Omer Imru that it's kosher, but since it's not something that should be done, so it's not common, and that is not a concern. And Rashi now returns to the position of Shmuel, which is what started this discussion. On the previous summit, Shmuel was not sure. Let's say a husband tells two people to write a get. So can the two people ask a scribe to write the get and they'll just sign the get? Or do the two individuals, they have to write the get as well? And the question Shmuel said was whether when the husband says to write the get, is he referring to their handwriting, meaning their signatures, or is he referring to the actual writing of the get? And the Gemara said, well, even if he is referring to the signatures, why is it that they're allowed to tell a scribe to write the get? Isn't that a problem of mili lo mimsran l'shliach? And we know that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi, and that's what started the whole discussion. The Gemara said, well, Rabbi Yossi admits by Omer Imru, and this would be the same thing as Omer Imru. And so Rashi now points out, Shmuel less like Rabbi Yirmiyah. Shmuel happens to not hold like Rabbi Yirmiyah. Da'amar chesam sofer shaninu. Rabbi Yirmiyah is the one that says that Mishnah is not talking about the writing of the scribe, it's talking about the signature of the scribe. Ela ksav sofer v'chasam aid. Rather, according to Shmuel, that Mishnah is talking about the writing of the scribe, meaning he wrote the get, and then you had one aid that was signed on the get. Kedamrinan b'hamagarish. That's what we're going to say later on in Parak HaMagarish. V'lo muki laka Rabbi Yossi. Shmuel himself holds that Mishnah is not following Rabbi Yossi. V'lo ayri masnisun b'chasima sofer sofer klal. That Mishnah is not talking about the signature of the sofer. Ubein Rabbi Yossi, ubein Rabbi Meir ksheira hachasima. It's kosher according to Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Meir. Ushmuel less later Rav Chisda. Shmuel doesn't hold of what Rav Chisda said. The Amar Rabbi Yossi, he who said that Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. Uchsav sofer v'divrei hakol. Rather again, that Mishnah is talking about the writing of the sofer, the writing of the get, and it follows according to everyone. But again, the Gemara over here is just clarifying the position of Rabbi Yossi according to the interpretation of that Mishnah based on Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rav Chisda. And Tosas also point this out. Lo shchicha perish bekuntris. Rashi explains l'shmuel islay b'perak basar d'chsav sofer ve'ed shaninu. Shmuel himself holds that Mishnah is talking about the writing of the scribe and an aid. V'yasi afilu Rabbi Meir. That Mishnah follows even Rabbi Meir. It's not just Rabbi Yossi. Umikol makam tzarach lomar nami ali bei de lo shchicha. But nevertheless, says Tosas, you still have to say this answer even according to Shmuel that it's not common to have omer imru. D'mitchila lo hiksha ela mikach de lo mistaber de polik Shmuel at the Rabbi Yirmiyah Rav Chisda. Because the whole point of the original question is that it doesn't make sense to say that Shmuel argues on the fundamental points of Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rav Chisda, and so therefore again, even according to Shmuel, you are going to have to answer that the idea here is that it's not common, even though Rabbi Yossi does admit that Omer Imru is kosher. But the Gemara continues, V'leichash, but we should still have a concern in this Mishnah when we have a signature of a scribe. We should be concerned as follows. Dilma Amar Luhu Lebeit Shrei Imru Lesofer V'yichtov V'atem Chasomu. Maybe the husband said to two people, tell the scribe to write it. Again, a case of Omer Imru, and you should sign it. And again, if Omer Imru is kosher according to Rabbi Yossi, we should have the following concern. V'yazli Hanach Mishum Kisufa de Sofer. These two individuals went because of the shame, the possible embarrassment of the Sofer. Umechaz Milei Lesofer B'hadichan Minayu, and they had the sofer sign along with one of them. And again, Ubalo Amar Hachi, and the husband didn't say that, and maybe that should be a concern anyhow. And as Rashi over here explains, Dilma Amar Lu Atem Chasomu, maybe he said that you should sign to the two individuals, V'imru Leploni V'yichtov, and then tell so-and-so to write it, V'hamrin Lekam on kosher v'sasa, because we're going to say later on, that's not a case, that's a case that's kosher and you're able to do it lechatchila. It's not kosher v'lo sasa, which we can say is lo shchiach. V'imach sheretz chasim ha-sofer beget, and if we're going to allow the signature of a sofer by a get, Azli, Hani, Sahadi, Mechas, Mila Sofer, Mishum Kisufa, again, you're going to have the same problem. If Omer Imru is kosher, aren't these witnesses going to go along and have the sofer sign because they don't want to cause embarrassment to the sofer? And the Gemara answers to that. Amri, they answer, Hanami kosher v'lo sa'asahu. We'll say in that case as well, it's kosher, but it's not something that should be done. That kind of Omer Imru as well is not something that should be done l'chatchila. But the Gemara says, as Rashi just pointed out, Hanicha l'man d'omer kosher v'lo sasa, that works according to the one who says it's a machlokas. That works only according to the one who says it's something that should not be done. El l'man d'omer kosher v'sasa ma'ikal l'memer, but according to the one who says it's kosher and it's something that can be done l'chatchila, what are you going to say? It does seem in this case we should have a concern. And so the Gemara instead says, Ella, rather, what you have to say is, Rabbi Yossi tarti Amar. Rabbi Yossi himself actually does say both are problematic, meaning mili lo mimsran l'shliach, and according to Rabbi Yossi, Omer Imru is also a problem, and it's completely a problem. And therefore, since there is no Omer Imru, there's never an intermediary, and that's why Chasam Sofer, that's why the signature of the Sofer will be kosher, according to Rabbi Yossi, and we're going to have to say, Shmuel savar la kivasi b'chada, upalig oleh b'chada. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi in one regard, but he argues with him in the other regard, meaning to say Shmuel himself holds that mili lo mimsran l'shliach, that's like Rabbi Yossi, but when it comes to Omer Imru, so Shmuel says Omer Imru is kosher, and since Shmuel says Omer Imru is kosher, that's why again, if the husband tells two people to sign a get, we consider the writing of the get, since that wasn't included in the instruction, it's as if it's a case of Omer Imru, and those two individuals would be allowed to tell a scribe to write the get, because according to Shmuel, Omer Imru is kosher. And Rashi explains, El Rabbi Yossi tarti Yamar, rather Rabbi Yossi said both halachas, Elavade Rabbi Yossi tarti Yamar l'psula, meaning both are puzzle, Bein Shamar l'shlosha tenu, Bein Shamar sha'amar Imru l'ploni v'ichtov, uploni v'yechsum u'puzzle, whether he tells three people tenu, so there we say mili lo mimsran l'shliach, they can't give that over to somebody else, or even if it's a case of Omer Imru, meaning the husband says, go tell a scribe, and he'll write it, and tell so-and-so and so-and-so that they should sign it, that's all puzzle. And the Amoroim that argue later on whether Omer Imru is something that should be done lechatchila or not, aliba de Rabbi Meir pligi, that's only according to Rabbi Meir that they're arguing, meaning if you hold mili mimsar and l'shliach, so then there's a machlokas Amoroim whether we say Omer Imru is something that's lechatchila or not. Rabbi Yossi pasal lagamri, because according to Rabbi Yossi, just like we say mili lo mimsar and l'shliach, so too Omer Imru is completely pasal. Ve'isal de Rav Chisda, the hadu katani chasam sofer kosher, and according to Rav Chisda, when it says again chasam sofer is kosher, Rav Yossi, that's going to be Rav Yossi, the lekel amecha shem shliach tziva v'lo bal. There's no concern that maybe there was a shliach giving the instructions and not the husband, because again, according to Rav Yossi, mili lo mimser l'shliach in all situations, and there would never be an intermediary. Ushmuel de Amar Leel, and Shmuel said earlier, hadavar tzarich Talmud. Shmuel said we're not sure when the husband says ksovu, is that referring to the writing of the get or the signing of the get? And if it's the signing of the get, then a sofer would be allowed to write it. He said again that if the word ksovu is referring to the signatures, so then the writing of the get itself is like omer imru, and the shliach is allowed to tell a scribe to write it. That's totally kosher. So savar like Rabbi Yossi b'chada, so he holds like Rabbi Yossi in one regard. The Omer Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yossi hechid lo omer imru, meaning Shmuel would say the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi if it's not a case of omer imru. In general, mili lo mimser and l'shliach upaligale ba omer imru, but Shmuel would disagree by Omer Imru. There he would say that it is kosher. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above. Amar Shmuel, Amar Rebbe. Shmuel said that Rebbe said, Halacha Rabbi Yossi da Amar mili lo mimser and l'shliach. The halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, who says that instructions cannot be given over to a shliach, meaning if a shliach is given instructions, he cannot give those instructions over to someone else. He can't appoint another shliach. Amar Lafan of Rabbi Shimon Berebi, so Rabbi Shimon Berebi said to him, Me'achar Rabbi Meir v'Chanina Ishono choken al Rabbi Yossi. Since we know that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Chanina Ishono, they argue on Rabbi Yossi, they both say mili mimser and l'shliach. Ma ra Rebbe lomar halacha Rabbi Yossi. Why did Rebbe say that the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi? Amar lo, he said back to him, Shtok b'ni shtok, be silent, my son, be silent. Lo reisas Rabbi Yossi, you never saw Rabbi Yossi. Il mole reiso nimuka imo. If you had seen him, you would know that all of his reasons are with what he says. He backs up what he says with good reasoning. The Tanyas we learned in a brayso, Isi ben Yehuda hayamona shivchan shel chachamim. Isi ben Yehuda, he enumerated the praises of the various chachamim. Rabbi Meir chacham v'sofer. Rabbi Meir is wise and a scribe. Rabbi Yehuda chacham l'kashayirtze. Rabbi Yehuda was wise when he wanted to be. Rabbi Tarfon gal shel agozin. Rabbi Tarfon was a pile of nuts. Rabbi Yishmael chanus miuzenes. Rabbi Yishmael was like a store that is stocked. Rabbi Akiva tzar bolim. Rabbi Akiva is like a filled storehouse. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri kupas harochlim. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is like the boxes of the peddlers. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah kupas shel besamim. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is like a box of spices. Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kav v'naki. The teachings of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov are measured and immaculate. Rabbi Yossi nimuko imo. Rabbi Yossi has reasons to back up what he says. Rabbi Shimon tochen harbi motzi kim. Rabbi Shimon grinds a lot and puts out a little. Tanit was taught, what does that mean? Mishkach kim, it means he forgets very little. Umasha motzi and omotzi elasubin, whatever he removes from his memory, he's just removing the chaff, he's just removing that which is not as important. V'chein amar Rabbi Shimon l'talmidav, and similarly Rabbi Shimon said to his students, B'ni shanu midosai, my children learn my ways, my attributes, shemidosai trumos midosav shel Rabbi Akiva, because that which I teach, it is the finest of the finest from Rabbi Akiva. And Rashi explains, Nimuko imo, Rabbi Yossi had his reasons with him, Perusho imo, he had the explanations with him, Lases tam l'chol devarov, sheyam yashev es devarov, he could give reasons for everything he said. Chacham v'sofer, Rabbi Meir was wise and a scribe, kedamin v'Meseches Sota, amarti lo lav lorani, like it says in Meseches Sota, I said to him that I'm a scribe. Chacham l'kashayirtzer, Rabbi was a chacham when he wanted to be, kashayarotzer lios mason u'mesyashev b'dvarav hayachacham, when he wanted to contemplate something, he was a chacham, he was wise. Gal shalagozim, a pile of nuts, that refers to Rabbi Tarfon. Mefarish b'yavas Rabbi Nasan, magal shalagozim, adam notel achas mehen, ve'im nikbotzas v'noflo zu al zu, kulon kach Rabbi Tarfon b'talmud v'shalo davar hayamevi lo raya mikra medrash mishnah halacha v'agoda hakol yachad. It's explained in Avos Rabbi Nasan just like by a pile of nuts. If you take one nut and they're all gathered together, so they all start rolling down, they fall one on top of the other. So too Rabbi Tarfon, if a Talmud asks him something, he could bring a raya from all over, from Sukkim, from Medrash, from Mishnah, Halach, and Agoda, all together. Chanus miuzenes, this was referring to Rabbi Yishmael, he's like a store that is stocked. Yenam muchan batam, it always has wine in it. Sheina chenvani tzarech lomar, lelochin himtinu, v'yavi lechem, the storekeeper doesn't need to say, wait, I'll get it for you. Kach nitzrach adam lelamin mipiv, mizuman lo v'talmud arach befiv. So too over here, everything was already organized. He didn't need to tell a Talmud, he didn't need to tell a student to wait while I find this information. Rabbi Akiva is an Otzer Bolam, he's a full storehouse. Kach mefurish b'Avos Rabbi Nasan, it's explained in Avos Rabbi Nasan, Lama Haya Rabbi Kiva Doma La'ani Lama Haya Rabbi Kiva Doma. What's Rabbi Kiva similar to? La'ani Shanat al Kupaso V'yatza L'Sad Matzah Sa'orim Katzar V'nasan Ba Matzah Chitin Nasan Ba V'chein Pulim V'chein Adashim. It's similar to an ani. He takes his box, he goes to the field, whatever he finds, he harvests it, he puts it in the box, the different produce. And when he comes to his house, he separates out each min to itself. Kach Rabbi Akiva, so too by Rabbi Akiva. When he learned from his Rebbe, from his Rebbeim, Shama Davar Mikra Mirabosav, Yachrav Alocha, Yachrav Medrash, Yachrav Agoda. He heard all these different things, Psukim, Halacha, Medrash, Agoda, Nasan Livo Lachzer Alein, and he went over it. He organized it all. Elman Mikra Liatzmo, Medrash Liatzmo. He didn't say, I'm going to learn Mikra first by itself, and then Medrash by itself. Keshenase Chacham Gadol also Kol HaTorah Matbos Sider, Midrash, Sifri, V'Sifra Levadan. But when he became a Chacham, he organized everything. V'shanan Liatzmo L'Talmida, V'Halachas Liatzmo, V'Agodas Liatzmo. When he taught it all individually, organized. V'nira Be'enai, Otzer Bolam, Sogor, Mizgiros, Levadan, Mechitzas, Kemoshosim, B'Tevas, Gedolos, Liten Chitin Mikan, Sor Mikan. That's what it means over here, Otzer Bolam, where they have walls, they have separations where they put different things, the wheat and the barley, Adashim Mikan, Kemo Piv Bolam, Veraglam, Mevulamos, Bebechoros, Klosh Balaz. Again, the basic same idea in terms of Rabbi Akiva organizing the material. And Rashi continues, Kupas Arochlim, that refers to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, was like the baskets of the peddlers, Mefarish Hasam, Arochel Zeshe Bol'ir, Sholim Mimenu Afar Simon Imach, Omer Hein, Polaitan Imach, Omer Hein, Kinmon Imach, Omer Hein, whatever they ask the peddler for, he has it with him. Kach Nitzra Chadam Lishol Davar B'Mikra Meshiva V'chein B'Gemara V'chein B'Medrash V'chein Ba'agada. The same thing is true by Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Whatever they ask him in, he has the answer. Ve'en Shevach Zed Doma L'Shal Rabbi Akiva. Rashi points out this praise is not the same as Rabbi Akiva. Shenasan Libo Techila V'Loman HaKol Mevulvel V'Achar Kach Sidron. Because there Rabbi Akiva, he first learned everything, it was all mixed up, and then he went ahead and organized it. Kupa Shal Besamim, and then the Gemara said Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was a Kupa Shal Besamim, a box of fragrant spices. Doma lekupas harochlin, it's just like a kupas harochlin, it's like the boxes of the peddlers. Ela sharochel mitoch shem naso lekach. But when it comes to a peddler, since that's his business, marba min and yoser v'kosher kalachar b'tzro levado, he's got a lot of different types of things that he ties up. Lios mezum and l'shalo, to be prepared for the person who asks him. And then we said Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is kav v'naki, is measured and immaculate. Lo limit harve keshar chaveirav. That means he didn't learn as much as his colleagues. Elamash omer b'veis hamedrash naki u'shalocha kamos oleon. But whatever he did say in the beis medrash, it's immaculate. The halacha is always like him. And then it said that Rabbi Shimon was tochen harbe shana harbe. He learned a lot. He means grinding a lot, means learning a lot. Motzi kima mefarish leim motzi kima. We're going to explain means he forgot very little. Tana mishkach kima mitalmudo. He forgot very little of his learning. Umasha motzi and motzi ala subin, and that which he did remove from his memory, it was only the subin, only the chaff. Masha shachach mitalmud lo shachach ala dvarim shalo niru shalacha kemos, and anything he forgot, the halacha wasn't like that. Anyhow, shanu midosai limdu torah. You should learn my Torah. Shemidosai trumos midosa shel Rabbi Akiva, because it's the finest from the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. Bechartim utramtim mitochikri mishneyosa shel Rabbi Akiva. I selected from the main teachings of Rabbi Akiva. V'hainu breira achar breira. That's a selection after another selection. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above. Amar l'shnayim imru l'sofer v'yichtov v'leploni uploni v'yechsum. If a person says to two people, tell the scribe to write, and tell so-and-so and so-and-so to sign. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. Rav Huna said that Rav says kosher, that is kosher. This is essentially the case of Omer Imru we were discussing above. He specifically tells these individuals, the shluchim, to go appoint other people. It's kosher v'losasa zos b'Yisrael b'lechatchila. This should not be done. Again, this is the same machlokas amoraim that we mentioned above. Amar le'ula le'Rav Nachman. Ula said to Rav Nachman, v'amri la Rav Nachman le'ula. Some say Rav Nachman said to Ula, me'achar de kosher. If it's already kosher, so ma'ilo sasa zos b'Yisrael. So why shouldn't you do it lechatchila? What's wrong with doing it if it's kosher? And the Gemara says, Amar le, so he said to him, Chayshinon shematiskor edim. We're afraid maybe she's going to hire witnesses. And Rashi explains, Shematiskor edim, maybe she'll hire witnesses, Lakach sheyomrim b'shem bala, those witnesses she'll pay them to say, in the name of her husband, L'sofer lichtov v'lo edim lachsam, to tell a sofer to write it and the edim to sign it. Since we have this concern, that's why Omer Imru, to have such an intermediary, is not going to be a good idea. But the Gemara continues, but is this really a concern? Vatanya, but we learned in a brayso. If you have witnesses that are signed on a field that's purchased, or on a gerisha, on a divorce document, the Chacham are not concerned for this. And Rashi explains, Lo chashu chachamim l'davar zeh, me'achar shemakir chasimas, and since we recognize the signatures, Lo chashu lomar sheker chasma, we're not afraid that they signed, that they forged it, and therefore if we're not afraid of forgery, why are we afraid that they would tell witnesses to write and to sign a get, even though they weren't really instructed by the husband, they were hired by the wife? Just like we're not concerned with forgery, we shouldn't be concerned with this scenario. And the Gemara answers to that, Ma'isa lo avdi, so they themselves, Adam themselves, are not going to sign falsely. They're not going to forge. But diburo ka'amri, but they will tell others to do that, and therefore we do have such a concern. And the Gemara continues, Amar l'shnayim imru l'sofer v'yichtov v'atem chasomo. If you have a situation where the husband tells two people to tell a scribe to write, and you sign, Rav Chisda Amar kosher v'lo sasa. Rav Chisda again says it's kosher, but it shouldn't be done. Rabba bar Chana Amar kosher v'sasa. But Rabba bar Chana says it's kosher, and it is allowed to be done l'chatchila. Nachman Amar kosher v'lo seyasar. If Nachman says it's kosher, it shouldn't be done. Rav Sheshes Amar kosher v'seyasar. Rav Sheshes says it's kosher, and it can be done. Rabba Amar kosher v'lo seyasar. Rabba says it's kosher, it shouldn't be done. Rav Yosef Amar kosher v'seyasar. Rav Yosef says it's kosher, and it can be done. And Rashi explains, V'atem chasomu, in the case where the husband says, and you signed, there we don't have the concern that she's going to hire, because in this case they're not signing, unless they hear directly from the husband. It's not a situation where there's an intermediary, and so therefore there shouldn't be such a concern, but nevertheless, some of the Amoroim say, it shouldn't be done, we make a gezer in this case, because of the other case where they're not asked directly, where they're not being asked directly to sign, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Zayin Amud Beis.